everyone. Before I begin on these stories, please try your best to be respectful in the comments. These aren't stories about people bragging about getting away with murder. These are stories from real people who had their backs against the wall and felt they had no other option. A situation that I hope for myself nor any of you ever have to be in. So please try your best to be kind in the comments section. All that being said, let's get into the stories.
Before I begin this story, I just want to say in advance to all those that are supportive through this post, I greatly appreciate it. I do not condone violence, and I do not support sending your kid to school with guns, although I'm glad my dad didn't see it that way at the time. For those that don't believe me, I don't blame you. Everyone lies on the internet, and it's always good to be a healthy skeptic. It's been 15 years, and it definitely brought back more emotions than I've been wanting to admit. I grew up in a posh DC suburb. We rarely have crime, and when we do, it's typically a crime of abundance. Kids getting busted with coke, drunk driving, graffiti to look cool. You get the picture. I always considered it a super safe place until my life changed in an instant. My parents are immigrants, and I'm first gen. I speak the language of my parents' fatherland, and both my parents are naturalized citizens. Essentially, my family did everything to fit into America, and they were both able to achieve economic success in their own right. Behind my house was a park where I played basketball pretty much every day since I was 6 years old. Every now and then we'd get some kids not from the neighborhood, but I was friends with most of them and there were never any problems. One day a Spanish kid came and played with us. On one play, he had insisted that my friend fouled him. They then got into a shouting match and the kid pulls a knife. I was one of the few kids on my block who had a cell phone, so I instantly dialed 911, and in posh DC suburbs, cops responded to deadly weapon calls instantly. Not 3 minutes later, cops were in the parking lot and this kid was getting arrested. The entire time he was screaming at the top of his lungs that I was a dead man, that he was going to kill me. Being the macho high school freshman that I was, I laughed at him along with everybody on the court as he was hauled off to wherever they take minor offenders. Little did I know that his older brother was a capo in MS-13, one of the most dangerous and notorious Latin gangs in America. 2 weeks later, my father came home from work to find a dead rat nailed to our door with a note written in Spanish saying, "You're next." We called the police, but essentially there wasn't much they could do. Be safe, drive your son to school, and so forth is what the cops told my dad, but I was essentially on my own. My father, having served in special forces in his native country for over 7 years, had his own idea of protection. We had spent the next 2 weeks at the range where my dad made sure I could hit a pinhole with his old service-issued HKP-9S. Then he made me carry it in my backpack, even to school where I could have been expelled and arrested. Then it happened. My dad couldn't pick me up from school one day about a month later, so I rode the bus. I know one of this kid's buddies was on the bus who had an early stop, and the police would later discover that he had called the kid to let him know I was riding the bus that very day. By the time I got off the stop and rounded the corner, 3 guys were waiting for me. The other kid, his brother, and another MS-13er tatted up. I was a few blocks away from my house, so I bolted. They chased me and cornered me in my backyard before I could get to the door. The 2 older guys took out their switchblade and then told me in broken English not to fight, that it would hurt less if I didn't fight back. At this point, I literally pissed myself. I had never felt such a fear. They laughed and started walking towards me. And in that moment, I reached into my bag, pulled up my dad's P9, flipped the safety, then fired at the kid's older brother's chest from 5 feet away. He hit the ground instantly. The other 2 were frozen, but then the kid charged me. Although he had no identifiable weapon on him, I didn't hesitate, turned on my sights on him, and sent 2 rounds into him at point-blank range. I then turned to the last thug who hadn't moved an inch the entire time, but was still brandishing a knife. I then proceeded to unload the remainder of my clip into him. By that point, our neighbor, who was a lieutenant on the local police force, came outside butt-ass naked with his service arm to find me sitting on the grass in my own urine crying, all while 3 teens bled out around me. The remainder was a blur. My interrogation didn't last long at all. The 2 older ones were both illegal immigrants with assault priors and had weapons on them. The questions came down to whether it was self-defense when I shot the kid who charged me, the younger brother. They determined that he had incapacitated me while the other was still armed, and it was still an act of self-defense because my life was still in danger. Keep in mind, I was a minor. I was a rich white kid, and the neighbor lieutenant claimed that the younger brother had reached into his pants for something. That was a lie. He hadn't, but the lieutenant did it to protect me. I wasn't even detained for longer than a few hours. My family moved homes. Luckily, we had the means to do so, and I got sent to a private school in a different state, which ended up being a really great experience for me. Keep in mind, I was 14 when this happened, and I'm in my late 20s now. I don't regret anything. My parents sent me to counseling, but even the counselor saw that I was relatively stable, all things considered. I am not a violent person, nor do I hold any prejudice against Latinos at all. I am a little paranoid, and I do have a concealed carry permit now. I'm wildly socially liberal, but I do not hesitate to defend Second Amendment rights. I was around 3 years old at the time. My father was a rancher, and he had found some random hunters on his property, so he asked them to leave. As he was driving away, they had opened fire on us. He always carried a handgun with him for badgers or coyotes, so he had pulled it out and shot back while driving away. He hit a lucky shot and killed one of them. The other one was picked up by the sheriff an hour or so later. What leaves me in awe of my dad is that the first shot actually hit him in the neck. Luckily, it was only a .22. So my dad has me, a 3-year-old child, with him. He's hit in the neck, but he still manages to very quickly return a few shots and drive away. He made it to the closest neighbors and waited for an ambulance. He is fine though. He has a pretty big scar on his neck, and he very rarely talks about the story. I only know any of the details because my mom told me. Luckily, the courts found my father in self-defense of himself and me. The second guy got like 30 or so years in prison. My neighbor had killed a local mafia guy in self-defense. This was in the 90s. It had turned my neighbor into a mental wreck. He was an honest, hardworking guy who had never hurt anyone. The family had to move for obvious reasons, but I got the story from my dad, a friend of his in those years. The mafia guy wanted to buy my neighbor's home from him to expand their hotel. They offered a generous amount, but my neighbor and his wife weren't really interested in moving. They had roots in the neighborhood and a kid going to school as well as extended family in the area. But the guy kept harassing my neighbor for weeks until he had threatened to beat him to death and rape his wife the next time he came. Well, the next time the mafia guy visited my neighbor, the neighbor had called the police about the previous incident and filed for a restraining order. Well, the mafia guy clearly didn't care about going to jail. He pulled a gun on my neighbor, and that's when my neighbor wrestled him to the ground, beat the shit out of him, and then killed him by strangulation. The experience affected not just him but his extended family, who also had to completely relocate after the incident. Yeah, pretty crazy. I killed in self-defense a few times too many. Let me explain. I was deployed for 5 years out of 8 total years beginning in '98. A few times in the stand, and once in Iraq, the airborne invasion from the north. There were those that you had no mercy for. There were those I questioned. There are those that hang with me. The first time was shocking. I was in slow-mo mode because of the adrenaline of actually being in my first firefight. Then my buddy died and the guy was right next to us, about 4 feet away, about to kill me. He got shot about as many times as I had rounds left. I was shaking and almost got sick, but I snapped right back into it. There was another later that night by a grenade, and the gore was unbearable. A few years later and a few firefights later, I was in the stand. I was about to face off in one of the biggest battles of the war. It was 200 to 40. We were on a massive search and destroy mission when another battalion forced 200 Taliban our way in Zabul province. This was 2005. I killed 8, 2 being so close that they breathed their last breath on me. One I aimed for a solid 2 minutes, second-guessing myself because he was a kid. Nevertheless, a kid shooting an AK at our left flank. I'm now desensitized to the whole period. But today I highly value life and I'll avoid a fight and confrontation no matter what. I caught a burglar in my house 3 months ago, and I didn't even shoot him, though it was completely in my legal right. I stepped up next to him, cocked the .45 ACP, and told him to split. He was arrested within a day. I am very different from what I used to be. I used to like doing things, creating stuff, and having friends. Now I'm that guy. I live alone after destroying my relationships one by one. I'm selfish, alone, and with limited support. The fact that I have awards that very clearly mention me killing people at first was awesome, but now I look at it as evidence in a way, and I think I'll put it away forever. People who knew me in the past say I'm a completely different person, and I'm sure I am. I can't talk about anything because people just want to know if I killed somebody, and the ones who are always talking are actually the lies. Very few, in fact 0 people have been in as many firefights as me and brag about it. In fact, at work, people have not one flipping clue that I was in the army, because frankly this hero shit makes me cringe. I did a job that I loved for a while. Did I protect democracy? Fuck no. I miss my friends. I miss the old me that liked playing guitar and painting. I'm now a weirdo that can hardly get someone to talk to me for 20 minutes outside of work. The damage is done, and it's up to me to fix it myself. All in all, I don't actually care anymore. I have overanalyzed so many situations that I force-fed myself a belief that no one could ever change. It was them or me, and I won, and I just got lucky and kept winning. We're supposed to live in a society that values human life, but they don't. They surely don't when they martyr their own 10-year-old children so they can go to heaven. Some say we do the same, and I guess you're right. My only hope now is to survive. Survive the guilt, the dreams, the hidden PTSD that will surface one day. People say I deserve it, and I say they deserved it. Someone will surely have to do it to someone else. It's the only thing us people are good at, killing each other. Before I end my story, let me make this perfectly clear. I like the life that I live now. It's not the best, but I make it out very well. I do things to make myself happy and no one else. I'm not a mindless robot walking the streets looking like a serial killer. I'm just fundamentally alone because I can barely relate to anyone that wasn't in the military. I once did kill in self-defense. I won't go into details, but I was jumped by a guy that had been threatening me for weeks, and I wound up killing him with his own knife. It felt like nothing. It felt no different than being in a fistfight when it happened, despite being so much more, and afterwards it just didn't register. That is what bothered me. I mean, I did the worst thing you could possibly do, and I feel nothing? For such a long time, I thought there must be something wrong with me. How would it be possible for the empathetic, sympathetic, caring person that I thought I was to be completely indifferent to the taking of someone's life? I thought I should be having nightmares or be depressed. I should be having flashbacks. I thought I was supposed to be set off into fits by gory movies that reminded me of the incident. None of this happened. I just didn't care. No matter how hard I tried to force myself to. I wound up torturing myself with self-doubt, but I realized after a few months that I was doing it on purpose because I felt guilty about letting it go. It felt wrong to just let it go, but I was ready to, and I was ashamed that I was ready to let it go so quickly. I just didn't care. I wanted to care so badly because it felt like that's what you're supposed to do, but I just never did. I felt justified. Then in the heat of things, I felt justified afterward when it all settled down and I could think, and I feel justified now. The only scrap of emotion I felt besides my self-induced neurosis was when I visited the grave. I would like to tell you that I had finally realized what I had done, but in all honesty, my only thought was that being there might implicate me, so I don't know. My only experience with how you're supposed to handle such a thing came from fictional characters in movies and books. There was no other frame of reference, and my expectation of what to feel was warped. I couldn't tell anyone, couldn't go to therapy at the time, and I just had to deal with it all on my own. It just eventually went away, and to this day, the only thing I really feel bad about is just how easily it all went. I've had my own kind of Shane Botwin experience, from Weeds, in which my father was a drug dealer years and years ago. I was 10 years old waiting outside a room while my father and another man were discussing business in another country, not the US. I was waiting in a chair and I had heard an argument that escalated into a fight. I went inside and found the man on top of my father with a knife to his throat threatening him. There was a gun several feet away from me which appeared to have been lost during the wrestling. I grabbed it, pointed it, closed my eyes, and then pulled the trigger 4 times. I had struck the other guy in the back as well as the side of the head. My father thanked me and then assured me that I had done a good deed. I had 3 more encounters just like this over the next 10 years. Although the situations and setups were quite different, but it left 2 people dead, 1 injured, and 1 where my father was critically injured. I'm now 30, have a job, and a family and a wife. My father has moved away from that line of work and is in something legitimate and wholesome for the community, but I hardly have any contact with him now. I can't honestly say if it's affected me. I've watched people being killed in front of me since I was 4. Yeah, it was a weird childhood with my father. I always thought what I did was a reaction to the situation. I suppose the first time it made me feel weird, empowered, empty, scared but in control. I liked it, but I didn't enjoy it. I do feel like the value of life is a lot more perceivable now, which is to say we're all just bags of expendable flesh. Some will be missed and mourned, and others will not. To be honest, I never really put much thought into these experiences since they happened so young. I guess I let those experiences help me develop. I have nightmares every now and then which I'll wake up sobbing, but that's about all of the emotion that I think I've spent on the past. I don't think about it daily anymore. Not like, hey, that guy messed with me, I could kill him. I'll just think of him as an asshole and move on. The worst escalation was with my wife's ex-boyfriend who kept talking mess, and as soon as he put a hand on me, I knocked him on the ground and put a knife to his throat. It was only intended to be a threat. No one knows though about what I did or went through, just my dad. I'm using a throwaway account to post the story and to keep my identity safe. I have no way to verify this without compromising my and my father's identity. I have a business contact who had brought this up over drinks. He had killed a junkie holding a pistol to his mother's head after he had assaulted her in her own home. He had walked in to check up on her as he hadn't heard from her in a few days and she wasn't answering the phone. Saw the guy, ran back to the car, got his gun, came back, and it was over in less than a minute. 1 shot to the head with his AR, which is an AR-15 style rifle with a barrel shorter than 16 inches, but isn't quite a short-barreled rifle. The nomenclature can be confusing. He was and still is a very macho guy with a lot of bravado. It was surprising and not all that surprising at the same time to hear that he had to go through intense therapy regarding PTSD stemming from that incident. His mood changes whenever he smells gun smoke or sees blood. I don't think he regrets what he did at all, as he had saved his mother's life, and waiting for the cops may have not yielded the same result. He had extensive firearms training which paid off. When he talked about it, his eyes dropped to the floor. The bravado was gone, and I could tell very much that this still bothers him. It took a few whiskey doubles to get to this point of him talking about it. Not that we were trying to pry. We were just swapping stories from our time in our specific industry. The court later found his actions to be fully justified, and he got his gun back a year later, which he immediately sold. By his account, he just didn't feel comfortable holding on to it anymore. I was a battered wife whose husband grew bored with beating me and decided to kill me. He made 5 separate attempts on my life, ranging from attempted strangulation to cutting brake lines on my car to trying to shoot me. The whole time I was trying to hide from him, I had begged law enforcement for help and begged for restraining orders, the whole 9. Nobody cared. No one would help me. I don't know what power he had, but he was untouchable as far as the legal system was concerned. He even burst into a local store waving a gun because someone told him I was there. When the owners called the police, they were basically told to just fuck off. I went to visit my parents. Again, his legion of informers told him where I was. He showed up and again attacked me. By a horrible twist of fate or divine intervention of God himself, my brother drove up just returning from the gun range, which is the only reason that he had a gun on him. He saw what was happening, knew that he was about to watch his own sister die, and he then leapt out with the gun, putting a shot right into my hubby's chest. My brother then immediately screamed for me to take my husband to an EMS station just down the road. I did so, but he died on the way. Even in my state of shock, I didn't miss the irony that I was now attempting to save the life of someone who's trying to kill me just 5 minutes ago. My brother sat on the doorstep and waited for the police. He was convicted of second-degree murder with a mandatory 15-year sentence. He was tortured in prison by guards who had burned holes into his skin and paid other inmates to attack him. He had to fight so ferociously against other inmates to stay alive that he eventually became a big deal, honored by the cons. This only intensified the guards' animus because they saw him as a greater threat. After he was released, he couldn't adapt to society again. This goofy kid with a kind word for everyone had become a raging alcoholic, nearly insane and prone to violence and suicide attempts. After years of hell, he had found God and sanity, kicked the bottle, and became something more of his formerly loving self. Though his peace was short-lived. He collapsed at work, was diagnosed with lung cancer, and died 2 days later at the age of 38. I live every day with the guilt that I directly or indirectly caused all of this horror to fall on him. Rest in peace, brother. I'll never stop being thankful for you saving my life that day. I only wish that I could have saved yours as well.